Good morning. We're just going to wait for a second while people join us. My name is Julie Montgomery. I'm the VP of Membership and Partnerships at SID-US. Welcome to the 2022 SID-US Career Fair. We'd like to thank our sponsors, ACDI-VOCA, IDG, and MENA for sponsoring today's career fair. So today this is the first panel session of the day. So we're so happy to have you here. We have a great panel lined up. Just to make sure that you're in the right panel, because there is one other one going on. This is the mid-career itch. Can you turn it to the next slide, please? So I just want to go over a few housekeeping issues. First, things to note, we are recording this session and we'll be sharing it publicly through our network and social media channels. Second, there's live transcription, closed captioning, which you can activate through your individual settings. Next slide, please. Looks like we're having issues with this slide. Well, as we go into it's about SID-US. Well, though I think most of you know SID-US since you're here, but I'll just briefly say, as you all probably know, we are the largest and most active chapter of the Society for International Development, which is an international network that brings together international development professionals to learn, share, and connect with each other. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, this is the mid-career itch, career transitions, international development. We have a great panel lined up. I will be introducing David first, who is the moderator. Thanks, David, for being here. And David is a Washington, D.C. career coach, so he's perfect for this career fair. He focuses on those seeking careers in development, humanitarian, policy, and peace building areas. He's an adjunct faculty at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University and the School of International Service at American University. He's also a member of the advisory board of the Masters in Humanitarian Assistance program at the University of San Diego, and he was a Fulbright scholar in Estonia. He is also the president of the Forage Center for Peace Building and Humanitarian Education, which is an NGO that offers experiential-based humanitarian training. As you can see, he has a pretty extensive background. I am going to ask him one question to get started, and then he's going to introduce the rest of the panel, and then we'll go into a moderated discussion. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We may not have time to answer the questions, but what we'll do is the panelists will put their email in there and we'll get in touch with you with any questions that we don't get to today via email. So David, to get us started, as a career coach, what question do you get asked the most? And then what's your answer?
First of all, thank you, Julie and Sid, for hosting this. I want to say that from the onset. This is a great opportunity. We have a great panel. When you say the mid-career itch, I forgot to bring my calamine lotion. So, hopefully solve the itch in other ways. I find that many of my clients are trying to crack into the space, we'll say, right? They often come from academia or from overseas, and they're coming back to the US. They're in academia. They're tired of academia. They want to be practice. Maybe they're just starting. Maybe they're just out of graduate school. Often they're outside the Beltway. I have a lot of clients who are kind of not DC based. They're somewhere else. And they're coming to me and say, international development is something that maybe I'm doing academically. I've done overseas. I've studied, but I got to get into that space. How do I get into that space, right? How do I crack into that zone so that I'm meeting and talking to people? And what I say is, look, I know networking, sometimes it's a big lift for people, but networking can just be getting into the space sometime, right? It doesn't have to always be kind of an informational interview, which I think is great, and LinkedIn, but like kind of being a fly on the wall. I tell people sometimes, sometimes you just got to go to a space and kind of observe and see what's going on, and then being a fly on the wall. And then you learn kind of strategically how to engage with people. But we have a lot of people are really, they really are drawn to this type of work, except that they're not kind of in the orbit of where it happens. And so they're trying to figure out how to do that. Yeah. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about our panel, introduce our panel, and then I've got questions for them, and that will kind of lead most of the hour. And then hopefully we'll have some time for your own questions that you can put in the chat. We have an hour, which is not a long period of time, but I do think we can really have a great conversation. So we have really three individuals who really bring a lot to the table. So I'm really glad that they're here and glad to share about them with you today. So Melissa Montgomery, as the Chief Programs Officer at Engineers Without Borders USA, Melissa and her team provides engineering oversight, safety preparedness, and educational opportunities for over 5,000 projects in 38 countries, including here in the US. She is a registered professional engineer in civil engineering and has worked as a consultant for 10 years prior to serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru, where she served as a water and sanitation volunteer. Melissa is passionate about social justice, education, addressing basic engineering needs for underserved communities. So welcome, Melissa. Kara McBride is a senior education specialist at World Learning and co-chair of the Education for Development Working Group at SID-US. Previously, she was an associate professor in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at St. Louis University, where she led teacher training for the department and taught classes in Spanish and applied linguistics. And glad that you're with us, Kara. And finally, Tara Arthur joined the Global Interagency Security Forum Secretariat in 2019 and serves as Senior Projects and Membership Officer. Based in the US, she has over 10 years experience in the development humanitarian space. She has served in various capacities, including programs, safety, and security and advocacy, both in the country and headquarters level. In her role, she's responsible for fostering GISF's membership engagement and developing member services, including forums, workshops, webinars, podcasts, and more. So thank you for joining us, Tara. So we have such a great group of individuals with us today. So I think we're going to have some great conversations. So within the context, I mean, we're looking at transitions, right? And transition is a journey. Transition is change, sometimes good change, sometimes not so good change, depending on how you look at it. So we really talk about that change. And starting off, I want to ask every one of you a couple of questions and then give you a time to kind of develop those answers. And then after we're done, all of you kind of answering those questions, then I'll come back and do a little bit of follow-up, and then hopefully we'll have questions for the audience. So I want you all, I'm going to start actually with Melissa. Tell us about your work presently. So I want you to do that, and a little bit about the transition, what was involved in that. Why did you make the transition, the steps in the transition, and the challenges and opportunities? And if you miss some of those, I'll prod you. I'll come back and say, what about steps in the transition if you forget it? So Melissa, I'm going to give it to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your transition.
Thank you, David. It's a really great pleasure to be here. So thanks for inviting me to join. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about myself. So as you mentioned, David, I studied engineering when I was in college for my undergrad and grad. I wanted to do engineering. I was very interested in water systems, and my big vision dream was to be able to do this at an international level and really help to serve underserved communities around the world. So right now I am working at Engineers Without Borders USA. We are a volunteer organization. So we match up volunteers with communities that have approached us with an engineering need. Typically, this is water supply, but it can be sanitation or structures or energy. We do a broad range of things, and I get to lead our programming, which is really exciting. I've been here at Engineers Without Borders for just over 8 years. And really, I mentioned earlier that I worked as an engineer first for about 10 years in the industry, and I was really not feeling connected to the work, not really seeing the impact that I had, envisioned for myself. And so it was at that time, after about 10 or 11 years working as an engineer in the industry, that I decided to make a change. And I really wanted to shift to the international space. And I saw the pathway to do that was really to try to, for me, was to leverage the Peace Corps. So I decided to join the Peace Corps. I was a little bit late in my career in joining the Peace Corps. I was in my 30s, but it was a great experience and really allowed me to make that transition.
Too late. Never too late. You remember Lillian Carter, Jimmy Carter's mother? Does anybody know how old she was when she joined the Peace Corps? I think she was like 71, 72 when she joined the Peace Corps. So
wow, that's incredible.
So anyhow, I didn't want to. It's never too late.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so really, I just wasn't seeing that connection to my work. And after 10 years of working as an engineer, I was really able to really develop my engineering skills, project management skills, leadership skills. And so that has all really helped me as I made my transition. So there were things, there was a lot of useful time spent, even though I wasn't feeling that impact. I still was able to gain a lot of skills through my work.
And were there, and I a lot of people have these experiences like Peace Corps, Fulbright, overseas. It kind of is that pivot. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's shared a lot in the development community. But what was the challenge? Were there challenges? Was it such an easy change for you?
Yeah, great question. Well, when I decided to join the Peace Corps, I thought, oh, this is how you do it. This is how you transition. And it wasn't that easy. There were certainly some challenges. While I had really solid engineering skills, the skills that I lacked were really around community development. And so I was able to develop all of those skills. And then even after I served in the Peace Corps for 2 years, I really wanted to continue that journey into the international area. And it was really, really difficult. It was very difficult to break into that space, even with my engineering experience. And so, what I did was, while I was in the Peace Corps, I had the opportunity, I learned about the organization Engineers Without Borders, and I actually started volunteering with them because I thought that the work that they were doing was really great. So I served as a volunteer, just helping with, logistics, language translation, not really engineering at all. Yeah. And after about a year or so of doing that, I was asked to be a mentor. So I served as a mentor for a couple of years after that. And that really allowed me to get to know the operations, like what the organization was all about, how they operated. And I, after honestly, about a year and a half of looking for a job, a position opened up at Engineers Without Borders, and I was just so thrilled. Reached out and was able to get this position. So just very excited about it. But it was definitely, there were some challenges there.
It speaks to being in the right space at the right time and offering yourself maybe as a volunteer with the hopes of kind of being there for something else to happen. I mean, that's really important. My son was in the Peace Corps teaching in Namibia, so I know the Peace Corps experience from a parent standpoint, right? And child experiences. So I know how significant that is, but yeah, being and mentoring is so important. So, all right, let me go to Tara, and same questions. Tell us about your work, your transition, and why the change, challenges and opportunities. So go.
Thanks, David, and to SID-US for this. Like many of you, I've traversed many different transitions and things like that. So I am excited to talk to you today. I guess taking where I am now. So I work for the Global Interagency Security Forum. And for those of you who don't know, GSF is a member-led NGO forum. And we drive change through our global network of over 140 member organizations, and we influence good security risk management practice for the whole humanitarian sector. And for us, humanitarian actually means, non-for-profit activities that seek to improve the lives of others and reduce suffering. So my role at GSF is really focused on our members. And as a senior projects and membership officer, one of my main aims is to help us expand our presence here in the Americas. Mm-hmm. And that's because we recently transitioned from being the European Interagency Security Forum to going global. So I work alongside my colleagues to produce different content, be responsive to different crisis onset developing situations that may be happening around the world to help our members, workshops, trainings, blogs, resources, etc. And I think it's interesting to share that because it speaks, a lot of the things I do at GSF speak really nicely to the transition that I even had to coming into GSF. So I got into the international development community a long time ago by just my interest in sport and development. And that's really the root for me. That was my trajectory in. And I've had different transitions along the way. Perhaps most recent and most notable to how I got to GSF is having babies, to put it plainly. And I think the most common refrain I hear now that I'm at GSF is, what were you doing before GSF? And the joke is, oh, I was out having babies, which is true technically. But I did some other things in that space too. And a lot of those things that I was doing, I credit the opportunity for taking a break from working in the sector before. So one of the transition pauses for me was my husband got a job offer overseas. I didn't have the first baby very long, so I have two. And in that job offer opportunity was very exciting because, we both had worked overseas previously, but we hadn't been together with a baby. It was a lot of things going on there. And I had the opportunity to really kind of work on some of my passions and kind of leave the space a bit. And I left it quite a bit. And in that time, I did a lot of different things we can talk about if you like. But for example, I think I did a lot of consulting, so I did keep my foot a little bit in the door. But I've also done things like real estate. And got my real estate license. I'm licensed in DC, Maryland, Virginia with RE/MAX specialist, which I have to say, by the way. But all of those things, I really am glad I took the break. I'm really glad because I was able to have flexibility, which, I didn't get to have a lot of in the previous pre-COVID time. I would say it wasn't quite typical to have a job that allowed you, flexibility.
It's interesting raising about parenting because often we don't want to talk about parenting. We don't want to say that was the thing, right? But parenting is, it's what people do, right? Not everybody's a parent, but I'm a parent, you're a parent, a lot of people are parents, and that changes their careers and you have to make adjustments. And I think particularly working with your partner, it becomes a dance kind of a thing. Like I have a lot of my colleagues and clients where it's like her turn and then it's her turn or their turn. I'll say their turn. They bounce back and forth as to whose turn it is to kind of do the things while the other one is with the children and bounce back and forth. And that's a game and a dance and a challenge in and of itself, I would say, right?
Absolutely. You hit it right on. That is the constant struggle. That's so well said.
I also say before I go to Kara, I always remind people who are parents that remember the skills of being parents are skills that are transferable. So if I said to you what the job was you had before was, well, I was in charge of transportation and I had to resolve conflicts and I had to manage the menu and order food and I do this and I do that. And they think, well, that's one heck of a job you had. What were you doing? I was an at-home mom or an at-home dad, right? So one of the things we have to think about is we get skills and aptitudes from those experiences too, right? And keeping that in mind. So, okay, let me go to Kara and then I'll come back to Tara and Melissa afterwards. So Kara, tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Right now, I work at World Learning. I've been here for 6.5 years. I am a senior education specialist, which in my case means that I spend a lot of time working on technical things, which even that term technical didn't mean the same thing to me before I came into this field. So I work on training of different types and creating teaching and learning materials and working on curricula. And a certain good chunk of my time also I work on proposals. So that's what I do now. My main career that I had before, as you said, I was an associate professor at St. Louis University. And there was a lot of connection because when I was there, I was working on curriculum, I was training teachers and making teaching and learning materials. So when I was at the university, I had a close friend who was working in the sector who would say to me, yeah, that's nice, but you should really, you should leave academia and you should do this in the development field. You would enjoy it more. It goes better with your personality. And I was intrigued and interested for many years. And then when I did leave academia, it was for reasons just that I wanted to do something else and come from an academic family and had always just had a desire to work in another sphere. So I actually, in between the two, went to South America and started a business and learned a lot of skills that I hadn't learned in academia. And then I decided I wanted to return to the United States. And I reached out to some friends to ask for advice on how to present myself in a non-academic way. As an academic, you want to have a 1,000,000-page long CV just because of depth in this field. And I was aware there were many differences, but I didn't really know what they were. So we started off with networking or being the fly on the wall, and I think that really is just over and over again. For people to know who the good people out there are, they have to know them somehow. So I think that was a key in my own experience. And as I work with people who I know are excellent at what they do, helping them maybe get into consulting or something. Yeah. Again, it's always, it has a lot to do with networking or being the fly on the wall. I kind of like the way you said that, David, because there are different things you can be doing while you're with other people, and that the whole process of observation is so important. And I would say that I've come to realize over time, when I was a professor of foreign languages, a lot of what I talked about was how people develop intercultural competence. And I think it's something that pretty much everybody in our field has. That's why they're so attracted to it. They've had the Peace Corps experiences or similar. And they've been in that situation where it's essentially a new culture. So I think one of the things that has helped me in my transition is that I had those skills of observing and understanding slowly. Sometimes I resisted it a little bit, but understanding that there are other ways of communicating, and that my community, the academic community, talks forever, takes forever to write papers, cites everything, and that is one way of communicating. And my job now is incredibly similar in some ways. The topics are really essentially the same, but it's done in a very different way. And so in terms of transitioning, a lot of it has been just this sort of like socializing myself and figuring out how to fit in different ways that I hadn't been trained on in my early years in my profession.
it's really an identity shift, isn't it? I mean, I going from academia, I spent early part of my career in academia, then I left and I had tenure. I gave up tenure. People say, you're crazy, you're giving up tenure, but I wanted to do something else. But it is an identity. I mean, you are an academic, you have a PhD, you have a 10-page CV, and now you're stepping into a world that doesn't look at your PhD the same way. It is not really interested that you presented in 25 different conferences and wrote 4 books. They don't really care about that. They care about what you're doing, right? So, and it is an identity, right? We identify as a career, who we are. How was that hard to kind of make that switch to now view yourself differently than no longer an academic? And how did you answer those questions when people said, how come you're not like an academician, you're doing this now?
When it is hard, I think it comes down to moments where you feel like one of your values is being threatened.
Okay.
So, and again, people, I think, make the transition into development because of all of the values that they have. They want to help and they want to, help the world be, better, reduce suffering, like Claire said, and so forth. But when I did feel resistance, it was, I think in academia, there are certain things that are considered that have to go along to show something is quality. Mm-hmm. And if you do it too quickly, for example, then you haven't taken enough care, and so then there's this resistance of like, no, I have to do it this certain level of quality, but if there isn't a citation in a particular document that I produce now, it's still based on the research. It just doesn't, so, but that's a small example, but maybe also, I think some people from academia associate business and commercial things as somehow bad, like, the academia is pure and it's knowledge and so forth. And so to do well in development, there's a lot of aspects to it that are marketing yourself, with the proposals as a kind of marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've had to notice that I sort of associate marketing with, ew, I don't like commercial things and capitalism and realize, no, this is a skill. I can use it for what I'm doing now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have to recognize a lot of development organizations are for profits. They're not all not for profit. So they're trying to bring in business, and you're part of that kind of a thing. And that is a shift in how you focus. I mean, you go in academia because you're trying to get away from that, and now you're going back into it. So I want to ask you all, change the focus a little bit. I want to kind of speak to another issue, and that is being women in a field of development. And has that presented challenges, opportunities, how do you view how the field is diversifying, right, in that respect? I know we're not really talking about transitions, but you represent your own experiences you have. Any one of you can tell me a little bit about that. I'll just bounce between the two. Just open your mics about your experiences as women and how you see the field diversifying. Tara, you just opened your mic, so you can just.
Sure. Well, I think working more primarily in the security side of things nowadays, there are some great advancements that I think we should celebrate in seeing more of my fellow women in the space. Hopefully we'll see much more. I think more the merrier, more the better. So come on aboard. But it doesn't come without challenges. I do think that it's worth saying that there is, like I said, ample room to see more. I think there's a lot of the perceptions that kind of create some barriers that hopefully we're breaking through a bit more, that make it seem like it's not as welcoming of a space for women. And I, as we speak more broadly of this, the wider development space, I think one of the things I personally would hope to see, and hopefully, we take some positive lessons out of COVID, is to see more flexibility, because one of the challenges in my personal experience is with, the whole childcare situation, having flexibility, being able to really just be a normal human, is not always, this is not always the most welcoming sector for that. I will say that I think I've heard some rumblings in this post-COVID life. It's not post-COVID. We are still very much in COVID world. Let me say that. But in this time where hopefully we're seeing more organizations be a little bit more open to flexible working environments, that may invite more of these brilliant minds that are out there who do want to work here, and give them the opportunity to come into this sector. So for me, that's where I feel like hopefully I can see more women jump into the community and feel welcomed by having, flexibility. Don't you want your staff to be able to work in a way that they're at their best? I don't know. That's just me.
No, I mean, that's a really interesting observation, because I mean, diversity is important, but does flexibility allow to bring more diversity in, right? In a sense, and where people can work at home and they're working around their family and so forth, and they're working, I mean, I don't know where you're working, you could be the other side of the world, but you're getting the work done. So there's been a lot of opportunities that have allowed then for more diversity in the workspace. I think about, people who have mobility issues, for instance, or people who are in very isolated parts of the country, and people who really, are not in the Washington orbit, just can't get the metro and, go downtown, and they're somewhere else, and what that does. So Melissa and Kara, what are your thoughts on, I was kind of asking about gender, but you can kind of take in a different direction you want to. Melissa, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, David. Well, so I came from an engineering career, which is very heavily dominated by men. And so that was actually a challenge for me. One of the things that I had a challenge with in that industry. As I made the shift to international development, certainly that kind of flipped that on its head, and now there's certainly a lot more women represented, and engineering in general is a heavily male-dominated field. So one of the things that I love about the work that I do is that we do attract a lot of diverse folks than you would normally find in the engineering field or in technical fields. So we have a lot of women represented, and a lot of people of color, which is super, super exciting. So for me, that's been just a blessing as I made this shift in my career.
We're talking about Engineers Beyond Borders, and I said to you at a different point that my son, who went into the Peace Corps, graduated from University of Maryland with an engineering degree. And then when he said he wanted to go in the Peace Corps, I say, you want to go into the Peace Corps and you have an engineering degree? You got to explain that to me a little bit more. And he did, and I understood it. He had a great experience. So, but that I think that's an important thing for us to understand, that sometimes we're coming from spaces that don't suggest something by the degree, but we need to go there just the same, right? And the women you're talking about also, this has always been a real chronic problem in American higher education, is that women go into engineering programs, they don't go through them necessarily. They get sidetracked, and then you're an example of somebody who got through it, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And just to go back to your note around your questioning your son's decision, I had the same question from my dad when I said I wanted to join the Peace Corps, and not just from my dad, from a lot of people. Similar to earlier, what Kara and Tara were speaking to. It's like, why would you go and study engineering and then decide to volunteer? Like, that makes no sense. So I think it is a challenge for people to really wrap their heads around something like that.
Kara, what do you have anything to share with us on the gender spectrum or diversity?
Well, that's funny actually, because in my work, we're almost all women. And there's this tendency for people to have in mind a certain kind of person that they want to hire, and then I think the people who are hiring already have imagined what the person looks like and whether it's a male or a female. And that's an issue I think that our field has, that there could be a lot more diversity. People get hired in this field maybe more than in academia because they've been in extremely similar jobs before.
Mhm.
And even in some, a lot of cases, there's also that salary. If you get a salary based on what you've had before, not really based on what your skills are. So maybe just to kind of keep up a theme, that be the fly on the wall, be present in a different space, I think when we're hiring, we really need to just struggle to find some ways beyond just the previous experience to be able to identify people who have the kinds of core skills that we're looking for.
Right. One of the things I think you're speaking to is the run up before you make the change. What do you do before you make the change? Right. In a way that is, you just don't say one day you wake up and says, oh, I'm going to quit my job and go into international development. Wait a minute. You have to plan this out. You have to bend the fly on the wall a lot of times. You had to have looked at the salary. You had to look at what you're giving up. I mean, academia is always that I got to give up my summers. Wait a minute. I can't do that kind of a thing. Right. Is that what you're speaking to? Is like the run up to doing that? What were you thinking?
For the person to, know what they're getting into also, but I guess I'm also thinking about, for example, there are a lot of people in the teaching careers who want to transition after the trauma of COVID. They want to keep doing education things, but not as a teacher right now. And I know a lot of people who are in that situation, but they don't look as like such great candidates for a development position because all of their experiences just in the classroom, and they haven't been part of any kind of consultation or the sort of international programming that they're wanting to get in. So it's an issue of how you can get, from where you are, other experiences that will kind of move you out of the smaller, more restricted kind of description that you fit before.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Tara and Melissa, because I was kind of changing on this run up. That is, how do you prepare for the transition? Not the transition, but how do you kind of think about how to prepare for that? Tara, you have any ideas?
How that's a really, I think, a challenging question because
That's why we're here. We want to ask challenging.
I love it. I think that even when you are wherever you are at this very moment, you always have to be thinking about what the next transition may be for you. And that's something I think I learned more recently than earlier. And it's something I would have probably told myself sooner, that yes, you will go through these transitions. Like, these things, but do you really know these things until you're faced with them? So I do like this question because as I think now, like I there could be a number of transition points for me, expected, unexpected, that we have no control over, some we may have control over. And so I think the best way to prepare is to acknowledge that transitions are likely to happen to all of us, is to remember that whatever it is that we're doing, we can use that skill or develop or take the positive lessons from whatever that might be. And that we should all be collecting like little acorns of knowledge along the way, so that when we do hit a transition, whatever it might be, that we know, look, this is a transition. It's okay. What are you going to do? You have everything in your little wheelhouse to make something of this.
Yeah, you put your acorns in your LinkedIn profile. I want to remind people that their LinkedIn profile is a good place to store your acorns. But the idea is that the idea that, used to be a day where, you start working in your 20s, your early 30s, and then by the early 30s, you've got the job you're going to take to retirement. And that's not the case anymore. It's like 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, and you could be still moving around in your 40s and 50s. And that's good and that's bad. I mean, we're kind of going into why it's good and bad for people because there's instability and so forth. But the nature of work does change, right? In our field, gig work, that is being a contract, being a 1099, is becoming much more predominant over being a W-2, right? At the end of the year, right? So in a sense, you're like, if you go into Starbucks, used to be going to Starbucks, you see 20 people in Starbucks, 15 of them are at work, right? Because they're doing projects. They may be in the international development field. They may be monitoring 2 or 3 projects at a time. So the nature of work has changed a lot. Melissa, you seem like you're going to add something to that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's when you're thinking about making a change, obviously, like you said, you don't just wake up one day and say, this is what I'm going to do. I think that attending things just like this is a really great thing to do if you're interested. Finding other people, that have made such a shift and understanding, what that looks like in reality and how long it takes, and what are the challenges, but what are the amazing things too, because I think we all made a decision for a reason, personal reason, to really have some kind of reward or impact that you feel in your job. So yeah, I think that and I know I don't want to sound cliche, but really just trying to talk to people about what it's like and what the challenges were. That would be my insight on that. Thanks.
Right. So let me ask you, and this may be the question we finish up on, and maybe I'll take some questions from the chat. The advice you got that you used, and the advice that you didn't get that you would have wished you had gotten. So advice that you got that you used, that you thought, man, this is great advice. Someone told me to do this and I did it and it worked out. And then maybe like, I wish somebody had told me this because this didn't work out the way I wanted to. So either one is good. Advice you got that you used. Even if it's like, it doesn't have to be like specifically, you need to join SID. That's great advice. So I'm glad you're doing it. Right? But maybe something that's broader than that also.
Well, when I out to a friend of mine who was working in this field, he, kind of oriented me towards, these are the big names, these are the big trends, read. And that's just very, very helpful. And just, I think just last week I was talking to another one of my teacher friends who wants to try to get into development.
Yeah.
And, the expertise that she has, I know, is more than enough for her to do a great job. But I know that unless she prepares herself, she won't say the magic words that the people who are hiring want to hear. And so this is advice that I sort of followed and would have followed a whole lot more if I fully understood it back then. But just the power of saying the right term, not just describing the concept, but using the exact term that they are looking for is huge.
The hidden language of a field is really important. I mean, international development, we use words and terms that you would not see if you were in the policy community or you were working on the Hill, and knowing that. And that comes from keeping up. I always tell people, it's just not to get a job. You've got to be reading. You've got to be reading DevEx. You've got to be reading, I don't know, the New Humanitarian, or you've got to be kind of immersed in it so that you're getting that language also is really important. Tara, how about you? Advice that you were given that you took, or maybe something you'd wish you'd been told to do?
Again, with the good questions, David. So I would say, actually, I see there's some Clarkies in the room. So hi, Clarkies, much love. I'm very proud of my IDC upbringing. And actually, a former classmate of mine way back when said to me, "You are the expert," and I was like, "Me? No. I would say that is probably advice I'm reminding myself even today, with friends of mine even right now and colleagues of mine even right now, that you are the expert. And that doesn't mean we don't have room to learn or that we know everything. That's not what I mean. But the idea that we are all capable people and we are all it brings something to the table, and it's what we are bringing that is what we need to understand better, and what we're offering, and be able to communicate that. And so reminding myself every day, which I'm trying to do more, so hopefully I can spread that with others too, is that, you know, we are the experts. What are we the experts of may change and grow and evolve, but let's, you know, celebrate that a little bit. So for me, that's my advice. And you said something about the advice I didn't have.
Yeah, you didn't get something you didn't get that you wish you had. I wish someone had told me that.
Ooh, controversial one. I wish that we made more money.
Well,
We don't.
and I got to tell you, that's not so bad, because I'm often dealing with people, clients, and they're coming from the private sector and they want to go into international development. And I say, okay, I'm working with somebody right now who's coming from IT, and we're starting off and looking what his salary is, and he wants to go. And I'm saying, you first have got to recognize that that's not what you're going to make. Right. And was like, oh, okay, well, he still wants to do it. Okay, that's fine. But you just got to recognize that as the kind of the reality that's going to be a difference when you're making a transition, right? You might down or up, but maybe you're doing it for other reasons. I mean, we're not doing international development work merely because of the paycheck. We're doing it because we are agents of change. We see this as a means to improving society. And this is why we do it, right? And you're doing it. The other thing that you mentioned when you were talking about Clarkies, I imagine these are because you went to school, right? You're alumni. The connective tissue is really important. When you're reaching out to people, like when you're doing information, identify the connective tissue you might have to them. I often tell people, like, they're interested in an organization and they want to talk to somebody there. I said, find somebody who went to the same school you did, right? Because alum always help alum, right? Find that connective tissue if you can. So, Melissa, advice you were given that you took or you wish you'd been given?
Yeah, so I feel very lucky because I have an older sister who is her career is in international development, and so when I was thinking about this, that's who I went to, and I got lots and lots of good advice, some of which I've shared today, but certainly one of the biggest pieces of advice is really because I struggled a lot with, well, how do I get into that space? You know, how can I get in, even though I have these skills? So, you know, she really pushed me to just do that networking, to outreach to people, to talk to people. And I thought that was excellent advice. So I'm very thankful for that. In terms of what I wish that I had known, you know, I think that it takes a long time. It's not quick. It's a long transition, and yeah, I need to have a lot of patience about that. So I wish that I had known that it was going to take so long. You know, I think that I was able to use that time and do things, you know, some good things in my life, but really just having the patience to understand that this is not an overnight thing, and it could take years. So
patience is really important. I mean, I have clients that come to me and they say, oh, I got to make a change in 2 weeks. I'm saying you got to change your expectations. This could be a several month or even a several year, because there are things that you may have to do that you don't recognize you have to do. So we start kind of developing and determining where you want to go. You might have to get some training, going back to school, developing all these things you can be doing while you're in the job that you're in now that you might not like and you want to change from. You've got to do that now. I call that building the scaffolding. You've got to build the scaffold before you make the change. And so a lot of things that you can do while you're there. I'm going to go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I noticed that somebody named Tizetta a while ago had said, oh, you know, I don't have so many of those sort of more commercial business skills. How can I learn them? And just as you were saying, you know, it takes years. I did start sort of studying up on things like that while I was still at the university. And they're so useful even at the university. I thought, gosh, why didn't they train us on these before? So yeah, and there's so many little courses. It's sometimes hard to take a big one, but you can at least start with the sort of little small online courses or something.
Oh, and you can learn, I mean, you could take YouTube versus, I mean, there's so much you can learn that we have to dedicate. Sometimes it's language. A lot of people like, oh, I learned French in college, but I'm not very, I said, this is the time is to go back and build your French. If you want to work in West Africa, go back and build. I mean, now is the time to do it before you start the transition, right? There are things that you can be doing. So, a couple of things, and I'm going to say a few things that I advise people, and then maybe we'll have some time for questions or some kind of closing thoughts, maybe one or the other. One, as I had said before, is that follow what's going on in the news, right? You want to go into an interview and somebody's going to say to you, well, okay, Melissa, what are things that you're following news? What's the most pressing issue in international development right now? And you don't want to say, well, I don't know. You want to say, oh, I was reading the New York Times last week, or I went to a DevX event, and this is what's going on, right? So you want to keep up what's going on, because that'll also make you comfortable in talking about that space, right? So you need to follow what's going on. Use networks like everybody here. And I know LinkedIn isn't everybody's cup of tea, but it's the only game in town, I got to tell you. So we should all be connected to you through LinkedIn. You've got to build your LinkedIn profile. I expect everyone here to connect with me and to collect with Melissa, Tara, and Kara. Or other networks that you're using, but LinkedIn tends to be it, right? You also have to devote time to this. You get to the point where you can't be thinking about this 5 minutes here, 15 minutes here, 11 o'clock at night, whatever. There comes a point where you've got to say, okay, I got to get serious now. I got to get it together. And you've got to say, okay, I'm going to devote 2 hours a week or 2 hours a day or whatever it is. And that's what I'm going to dedicate the time to. Looking for work is a job, right? We always have to recognize that. And it's not something you do here and there on your phone while you're in the metro. You've got to really dedicate the time. Don't overwhelm yourself too. I always see people they get overwhelmed. It's like, there are 15 websites I have to check. I've got to go to all these events. I've got to do everything, right? You've got to kind of limit what you're doing. You kind of in the beginning have to kind of look at the waterfront, but then you come down and say, okay, I'm only going to go to these 3 websites. I'm going to go to these events. I'm going to join SID. That's a great kind of one thing you should be doing, and not overwhelming you. Because if you overwhelm yourself, then you don't get anything done. And it's completely frustrating. Got to keep that in there, right? And that's good, overwhelming yourself. Sometimes it's good to have a buddy, to have a mentor, someone who you can run things by to help you decompress that you're doing too much. That's where having a coach or somebody can help you. You've got to take notes also. One of the things I'm struck with my own clients is that I'll ask them, well, tell me what you've applied for. He says, I can't remember the things I've applied for. They got little scratch pads. You've got to notes of not only what you apply for, what you go and who you talk to. You've got to really kind of make that a diary, that kind of thing. And then the final thing I tell people is that you got to take care of yourself. At the end of the day, you got to, looking for work is not an excuse to be eating a bag of Doritos a day. It's not an excuse not to exercise, right? In fact, when you're going through this change, these things about exercising, eating well, being mindful, yoga, whatever it is that you've got to do those things in spades now, because those are really going to carry you through the finish line. So keep those things going also. So it looks like we're about 5 minutes to 11. Rather than taking questions, what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask Melissa, Tara, and Kara to put their contact information in the chat. And then I'm going to turn it back over to them for the last 5 minutes. If they want to add anything kind of closing, what would you, you're sending them off to their transition. What would you tell them? Kind of final words, send off kind of thing. Tara, you got your microphone open, so you got to tell me first.
Actually, I did want to acknowledge Julie's comment, because I agree with her that you don't always have to be the expert. I think that's a really excellent point. While I think it's good to celebrate, the skills you have, that is definitely something worth mentioning. So thanks for that. And I would just say that, again, the acorn piece for me is the key. Like, remember that every person you meet, I think, David, what you said, it resonates really well with me, and how I've been preparing for the next transition, how I prepare for my current transition, and the unpredictable ones is to continue to collect them. And like you said, using the different platforms in the people and the contacts. And I'm very happy to put my contact in the chat and to be in touch with any of you who are interested. Happy to share more about my experiences, my journey, all of that. And just to say, keep going. There's a lot of opportunity for us to work together, and hopefully I'll get to meet more of you along the way.
Excellent. Melissa, Arcara, you want to add some final thoughts, wisdom?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks, David. Yeah, I really, I think one of the comments that you made was around the connective tissue, and I think that's huge. I think we're all connected more closely than we think. So, and I think those are leverage points to be able to help, find more information, get connected to other people. So my advice, I guess, would just be to have patience, continue to connect. And if there are volunteer opportunities, that worked really well for me. And I think that's a great pathway to get into organizations, whether it's a volunteer organization or not. I know I saw some comments in the chat around different other technical fields, like, maybe legal. I think there's a lot of NGOs and organizations out there that can use those kinds of skills, are probably actively looking right now. And so any way that you can offer to volunteer your skills in that area, I think it's going to open a lot of doors for you. So.
And Kara, you're going to get the last word before I turn it back over to Julie.
Well, back to the connective tissue and the acorns. We have them, but we may not be able to recognize them. So I would, say bounce ideas off of other people and have them help you figure out how to make that connection. Because maybe if you haven't worked in a particular field, it's almost impossible for you to know exactly where some of your pieces fit. So bouncing off ideas off of other people, I think, is very useful.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, the three of you, Melissa, Tara, and Kara. This has been a great conversation. I always learn so much from talking to people, and your own experiences are very insightful and helpful, hopefully, to everybody who's in the audience. I'm going to hand it back to Julie Montgomery, who is our master of ceremonies, and also, by the way, Melissa's sister. You know that. We learned that.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else you want to share? Go ahead. So Julie, thank you.
Yeah, full disclosure, Melissa is my sister. But yeah, I'm inspired by her story, hence why I invited her to this session today. Thank you, David, Melissa, Tara, and Kara. I mean, there's so much. It's great to learn about your journeys. And really, it was so inspiring. You all had some great advice. For those on the call, thank you for joining us, and the other participants. This is just the beginning of a great day today. So I encourage you all to go to the next session, which is going to start at 11:10. So we have a short little break, which is all about assessing an organization's DEI values. And then, for most of the day, I encourage you all to go to, you're all, the main reason why you're here is to go meet organizations and learn about them and see what job opportunities there are. So go to the exhibit hall, and then at the end of the day, come back online on Zoom, and we'll join us for a networking happy hour. As you've learned today, networking is extremely important. Just come talk to people, especially if you are transitioning, which it sounds like a lot of you are doing that, hence why you're here today. So thank you again. Round of applause to David, Melissa, Tara, and Kara, and we will see some of you at 11:10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, don't forget to fill out our survey at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye.
Bye.